Hello everyone and welcome to Fright Night. Are you ready for a scary story? A brave soldier returning home from the war, a beautiful young woman placed in his path as if by fate, and a simple strip of fabric hiding one ghastly secret. This classic urban legend, which is one of the older ones out there, isn't just creepy, it deals with deeper issues such as love, PTSD, loss, and healing. Are you sure you're ready for the green ribbon? Everything from the time of Jordan's honorable discharge up through the long flight back to America felt like a dream to him, and following the very real nightmare that was warfare, it was a welcome change. The town he'd grown up in wasn't huge, but it had an airport, and while Jordan had initially planned on returning to his hometown and starting a life there, upon arriving, he found it had changed far too much in his absence. People from larger metros had flooded the locale for cheaper housing options. The community wasn't as friendly, and all of his friends were off living elsewhere. After considering his options, he went to the storage unit where he had kept his Harley Davidson, filled its bags with clothing and the few important possessions he had, and took off on his bike at blinding speed, with no real destination in mind, only a desire to build something somewhere slower, quieter, and where the locals still treated each other like the family he'd never had growing up. He rode all day and night, and as he did so, the city lights faded behind him and were replaced at first by suburbs, then rural countryside, and later by farmlands divided by patches of unrefined wilderness. After driving for nearly 24 hours, the following morning, he decided to rent a room at a small roadside motel and get some rest before journeying onward. There, he slept for hours, and when he finally woke, it was night again. As he checked out with his military bag in hand, the front desk clerk, a young, bespectacled teen in a blue and white button-up shirt, eyed his luggage. "You served, huh?" he asked timidly. "I did," replied Jordan shortly, not ready to relive anything he'd witnessed during his deployment. "Wow, thanks for your service," said the clerk earnestly. "It's just, I lost my brother over there, and it's good to see you guys coming home." "I really appreciate that," replied Jordan. "Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about the area?" "Sure," said the clerk, visibly surprised. "Yeah, anything I can help with, I'm your man." "I came here from a day's drive that direction," started Jordan, motioning back down the highway. "I used to live in the town up that way, but I don't know how to explain it. It's not the same," finished the clerk, knowingly. "Yeah, I know what you mean, mister. My family used to live back that way. Everything's so crowded now." "Exactly," sighed Jordan. "I'm looking to plant down roots somewhere new, somewhere off the beaten path. Any suggestions for a place like that?" The clerk pulled out a map of the region and studied it, muttering to himself while he searched for Jordan's potential paradise. "Well, you can keep going on the highway here," said the clerk as he traced his fingers across the map. "But all of those towns aren't really towns anymore, they're cities. Got hit with the same waves of transplants we all got hit with. Let's see, oh." The clerk lifted his finger suddenly, as if he'd been stung. "Oh, you wouldn't want to go there," he trailed off, placing his finger back down and continuing across the map. "So let's see, a little further this way and—" "No, wait," cut in Jordan, whose curiosity was piqued. "What were you about to say? It's okay, you can tell me. I can make my own decisions." "Well," started the clerk reluctantly, "a few miles up the highway there's a turnoff on this country road here. It's real hard to see, all covered in trees." He pointed at a tiny, almost imperceptible line on the map. "Most people think you have to take one of the major highways to cut across this state. What they don't know is that this road goes for probably 500 miles through the forests that divide the highways. It looks like a giant wilderness, but there are actually small, unmarked towns about 200 miles in. Some beautiful countryside out there, mister. It's just the locals there don't want their hometowns blowing up, and they can be a bit unfriendly to newcomers." Jordan studied the map and retained a mental image of the landscape. "That's perfect," he said. "And I'm not bringing anyone with me, that's for sure. I'll take my chances. Thank you." He shook the clerk's hand, loaded up his bike, and sped off in the direction of this intriguing byway. The kid hadn't been lying. The trees made the route extremely difficult to see, and on his first attempt, Jordan accidentally shot right past it and had to turn around. Once on the road, he realized why it wasn't regularly suggested to travelers. It was filled with dangerous potholes that, especially on a motorcycle, kept him from going too fast. As he cruised in silence along the road, his mind began to wander, as it had so many times since his discharge. Images of enemy soldiers, blood, bodies, explosions, and terrified civilians flashed before him. He saw his best friend Kurt screaming into a radio for backup, saw the bullet pierce an inch above his heart, saw himself dragging Kurt back to the LUV they'd arrived in, and just like he was doing now, in the present, speeding off into the desert with no direction, just a desire to survive, to live. Just then, in his mind's eye, he saw an RPG explode next to them, and in a post-traumatic state that only the results of rigorous training and brutal warfare can create, he nearly jerked his motorcycle off the road, snapping him instantly back to reality, back to the county route's all-encompassing silence. He controlled his breathing and wiped the sweat from his brow. Jordan knew not how much time had passed, but as he rode on, keeping his mind on the journey, the sun began to rise just as the forests were replaced by rolling hills. A weathered old sign told him a town lay about 60 miles ahead. Perfect, he thought. Maybe there will be a diner. I'm starving. No sooner had dreams of eggs and bacon crossed his mind, however, when his bike began to make sounds. He began pulling over to the side of the road as the engine died on him. His bike had been in storage for so long, in the dim light, there was just no way of telling what was wrong with it. He came to a rolling stop right at the edge of an old wooden fence line, which, judging by the state of it, was probably part of some old abandoned homestead or a property that wasn't currently inhabited. As he attempted to work on the bike, his head was low and his focus was on trying to see what was in front of him, but this focus was broken by motion in his peripheral. He jerked his head up in surprise. Walking across the nearby field on the other side of the fence line was a gorgeous young woman. She had flowing blonde hair, piercing green eyes, freckles, and a smile that stopped his heart. She was clad in a light blue sundress, cowgirl boots, a worn brown hat, and had an opulent green ribbon tied around her neck that perfectly matched her eye color. She offered a smile and a friendly wave at Jordan, which he returned. "Hi," he called out as she approached. "I'm so sorry if I scared you. Bike broke down. When the sun comes up a bit more, I'll get her running and get her off your property." The woman pointed to her throat and then shook her head. "Oh, you don't speak?" asked Jordan. She gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up. "That's no problem," he said, returning the smile. "Like I said, I'll get her up and running and get her out of here." She cut him off with a wave of her hand, then gestured to him and gave him an okay sign. I'm good to be here?" he asked, and she nodded. She then rubbed her arms as if to say it was chilly out, and in one combined motion, gestured for him to follow her. "Follow you that way?" Jordan confirmed, laughing. "Are you sure that's okay?" She gave a smile that told Jordan she was positive, and he hopped the fence line and followed her up over the hill, where, to his surprise, he found a small 2-story farmhouse with lights on and smoke seeping from the chimney. "Is that your place?" he asked. She nodded proudly, then guided him down the hill, through the front door, and into a warm living room, lit by a fire and some dim lamps. She then gestured for him to sit down in a comfortable-looking armchair. "I'm Jordan," he said, reaching out to shake her hand. She took his hand and with her left pointed to a small box above the fireplace that bore the name Jade across it. "Jade," confirmed Jordan, sitting in the offered chair. "That's a beautiful name. Thank you for having me over here. I would have been freezing out there for another hour or two." She laughed silently, then motioned for him to sit at a table, held up a finger as if to say 1 minute, and rushed off towards what he assumed was the kitchen. In under a half an hour, Jade had returned with breakfast: eggs, bacon, potatoes, and toast. As it turned out, she was a phenomenal cook, and Jordan really questioned if he'd ever eaten anything more delicious. As they ate, Jordan chatted with Jade, and strangely, she was so good at letting him know her intentions through smiles, nods, little gestures, and with those beautiful eyes that it was like she was talking just as much. The conversation flowed, and as Jordan got lost in Jade's smile, thoughts of war left his mind. "And that's basically it," he finished after hours of chatter. "I feel like I've been on this same journey with no destination since I was born." Jade held up both hands in a stop gesture. She leaned in slowly, confidently, and kissed him. She then pulled away, and with a confident smile, framed by mock determination, she pointed at first to him, and then down at the ground. It couldn't have been clearer. She was asking him if his destination might be here. Over the following days, the two got to know each other well. They seemed to agree on everything. They spent late mornings in bed laughing, shared family recipes at mealtime, worked the land, and always ended their nights with a long walk along the fence line, right back to the place where they'd met. There was only one thing that struck Jordan as a bit odd, and that was the fact that Jade never removed her green ribbon. When he'd broached the topic once, however, she'd made a cutoff motion and pointed to her throat with a sad look. He'd seen the look before, on veterans who had been scarred or who had lost limbs. It told him that whatever injury kept her from speaking had likely left a mark that she was very self-conscious about. Other than that, though, everything was perfect. Life had become so peaceful, in fact, that Jordan was scared it was just a dream, and that at some point he'd wake up somewhere back behind enemy lines. But to his mounting relief, days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, and as Jade filled his hours, his flashbacks faded until he was certain he had found his home. At a point, he so thoroughly lost track of time that he couldn't remember how long he'd been with Jade. Maybe a year or two, maybe longer. Their time spent together was a beautiful blur of awe-inspiring sunrises and star-laden sunsets, the in-between of which was filled with laughter, passion, and love. And things continued on this way until one morning, Jordan fibbed to Jade about having to go into town for supplies, when in reality, he had pre-purchased a beautiful diamond engagement ring. He was going to make Jade his wife. The very next day, before Jade woke, Jordan snuck out to the tallest hill on their property, where there was a beautiful old tree. Through the course of their relationship, this had been their favorite spot to watch the sunset from. Beneath the tree's branches, he prepared a blanket and a picnic complete with a bucket of iced champagne. When Jade finally woke, Jordan let her know that he had a fun day planned for them, and she was instantly excited. First, he took her on a horseback ride to the far end of their property, which touched a river that they liked to fish. Next, he prepared her a delicious lunch. After lunch, the two enjoyed a relaxing candlelit bath, and after the bath, they enjoyed a movie. By the end of the flick, the sun was getting low in the sky, and Jordan suggested that they take their evening walk. They arrived to the hill with the tree just as the sun was setting, and Jade was ecstatic at what he'd prepared. They enjoyed dinner and champagne, and laughed and kissed. And then, when the moment was right and Jade was standing to touch the tree, he dropped to one knee. "Jade," he started, as joyful tears welled up in her eyes. "You make me happier than you could possibly know. Before I found you, I was lost. And somehow, in the way that you do, you chased my demons away. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever laid eyes on, and I was kind of hoping you'd be my wife." Jade sobbed joyfully. She let Jordan put the ring on her finger and then rapidly began kissing him, before composing herself in mock seriousness and giving him 2 thumbs up. It was a resounding yes. "I want to share everything with you," he started. "You can always trust me, you know that? There's just one thing I have to know if we're going to spend our lives together. I need you to trust me enough to show me what's under that green ribbon." Jade was still happy, but Jordan detected that same sadness in her eyes. She shook her head no. "It's all right," reassured Jordan. "You can trust me. Our love can beat anything." He could tell that Jade was strongly considering these words. She stepped forward reluctantly. Jordan reached forward slowly and wrapped his arms over Jade's shoulders, fingers brushing the soft silk of the ribbon. He found the knot, delicate as lace, and pulled. For the briefest moment, Jade smiled at him through her tears, as if she truly did want him to see everything. The ribbon slid free. Jade's smile never faltered, even as the flesh beneath it gave way, for a wet sucking sound split the silence as a deep red seam was revealed across her neck. And then, before Jordan could even gasp, her head toppled clean from her shoulders. It struck the blanket with a dull, heavy thud and rolled onto its side, eyes still wide, yet lacking the life that was present only seconds prior. Her body, suddenly weightless in his arms, collapsed into the grass, and Jordan staggered back in horror. In the growing night, the ring he had placed on her finger glinted in the fading twilight, atop a hand that had grown instantly cold. No matter how many times I tell that story, it never gets old, and somehow it always feels like it takes a little bit more of me with it. Okay, now down to the nitty-gritty. So where did this tale come from, and is there any truth to it? Historically speaking, the story of the green ribbon dates all the way back to the 1600s, when tales were spread amongst European towns of a girl who wore chokers, ribbons, or necklaces to conceal either a decapitation or some grievous neck wound. And while inciting circumstances within each different version changed over time, the main plot stayed generally the same. A young man would always meet his soulmate, and would, often years later, finally untie the garment that she always wore, only for her head to fall off. Quite simply, folklorists today theorize that such fables likely grew from the French Revolution's execution lore through the late 1700s and early 1800s, during which time women wore red ribbons across their neck to protest and symbolize the cruelty of the guillotine. It's not that hard to speculate that tales such as these were kept alive by various parties and passed down through generations as spook stories. As the green ribbon evolved over time, it would grow in popularity, and in 1824, famous Legend of Sleepy Hollow horror writer Washington Irving would write a piece called The Adventures of the German Student. Now, while some scholars claim this story wasn't actually inspired by initial French folklore, I'd be highly surprised if Irving hadn't been told some version of said legends, as to me, it feels very much derivative, and tells of a young German man in Paris who falls for a beautiful but mysteriously unavailable woman who always wore a ribbon around her neck, and the young man is met with unimaginable terror when removing the ribbon reveals the woman to be a guillotine corpse by way of her severed head falling right off. This story would make such an impact that it would be modified and passed down through further generations, earning its place amongst some of the most famous urban legends. And in 1984, what was officially titled as The Green Ribbon would be featured in the cult classic book In a Dark, Dark Room and Other Scary Stories by renowned horror writer Alvin Schwartz. In Schwartz's version, the tale would follow a young girl named Jenny who was made to wear a green ribbon her whole life, which was, once married, removed by her husband, only for her head to fall off. Now, as many of you know, Schwartz only included the most famous urban legends and Old Hill folk stories in his works, and as such, he definitely didn't just dream this story up. Parallel to the creation of his publication, versions of the Green Ribbon were also being spread around campfires, at sleepovers, on playgrounds, and at get-togethers everywhere. Some that featured a student, a drifter, or even a soldier, and others where the ribbon was black, red, or velvet. More recently, in 1997, the classic film anthology Campfire Tales would offer their own rendition of the Green Ribbon. Through the early 2000s and the popularization of the internet, a multitude of forums, databases, and story websites would begin spinning their own versions of the aged yarn, and from the 2010s and onward, various Tumblr and Reddit posts would depict the tale as possibly the scariest childhood story ever told, resulting on it being spread at a global level. Today, the Green Ribbon remains popular, and while I opted for a mixture of some of my favorite renditions in this telling, as well as a few of my own additions, if you like this story, guys, go check out other versions as well, because some of them are completely different and pretty spooky, and even threw me for a loop. While most urban legends are built around cautionary tales to warn youth of common dangers such as killers, kidnappings, poison, potential accidents, fatal mistakes, etc., it's somewhat hard to pinpoint what exactly the Green Ribbon is warning us against. Usually, we have a protagonist who's crossing some sort of boundary laid in place by their parents, such as sneaking out, drinking, picking up hitchhikers, or whatever. But in the Green Ribbon, and in most of its other retellings, the protagonist is generally made out to be a good man, searching for solidarity in his life. And maybe, when considering its history, that's because this story was told centuries before the term urban legend ever even existed. Which begs a chilling question that bleeds into our final segment. Is there any truth to the Green Ribbon? Logically, it would be easy for anyone educated in basic elementary level science or anatomy to scoff this tale off as nothing more than fiction. I mean, we know what happens when the neck is severed, don't we? Science tells us that if it's done fast, as is the case with a guillotine or axe, either the severing of the spine so close to the brain or the rapid loss of blood would result in near-instant unconsciousness and quick death. But have you ever heard the story of Antoine Lavoisier? Now, if you have a squeamish stomach, you may want to skip over this next part. Antoine was a chemist that lived through the French Revolution, and unfortunately, one of the many people sentenced to death by guillotine. Knowing his fate was sealed, he arranged with another scientist, one Joseph Louis Lagrange, that following his decapitation, he would blink for Lagrange for as long as he retained consciousness. While this story is roughly documented and we don't have concrete proof of the events that transpired after Lavoisier's execution, it's recorded that following his head's separation from his body, that he blinked for Lagrange and showed expressions of terror for a whole 12 seconds before his eyes closed, after which Lagrange called loudly to him, "Antoine," to which he opened his eyes once more before fading away, totaling in at around 15 seconds. Interestingly enough, as beheadings were eventually outlawed, our aforementioned modern science can only theorize as to the probability of what happens after decapitation, as it would take someone being executed in the same manner while strapped up to EEGs and other monitoring equipment to really know the whole truth. This leaves a frightening gray area, and while it may sound like fantasy, it does make you wonder. They say all legends have some roots in the truth. Could something have transpired centuries ago that we, today, don't fully understand? Something lost in an era of war, death, plague, and rebellion? In a time when men were still being buried with stones in their mouths for being vampires? In a place of witches, demons, and magic that can only now be found in our storybooks? At the end of the day, if you love your partner, hold them close. Like Jordan and Jade, fill your evenings with laughter, music, good food, and beautiful sunsets. Travel the world together, build a life, a family, and find happiness. Because you never know when the ribbon might come undone, and your time with them might be over.